Bonjour! Alright. Oh, let me back up one. We are now starting Lesson 11, Unit 3, Lesson 11, 3.11, continuing what we've been learning. So we are going to start off, as we often do in these lessons, I don't know if you've noticed, by looking at a new verb. This is the verb boire, which means to drink. To drink. And it is conjugated as such. Je bois, tu bois, il boit, elle boit, nous buvons, vous buvez, ils boivent, elles boivent. Means to drink. I drink, you drink, he or she drinks, we drink, y'all drink, they drink. Not super complicated, but as you can see, it is irregular. And it's conjugated very similarly to voir, if you remember, which is voir, 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 voyons, voyez, voir. Conjugated in like a very similar pattern to voir, to see. And along that same lines, its past participle is very similar to the past participle for voir. Past participle for voir is vu, vu. Remember, like déjà vu? And the past participle for boire is bu. J'ai bu. I drank. Right? And you can see it uses avoir as the helping verb in the passé composé, which you would know because it's obviously not a Vandertramp, which you have memorized all of. Yeah, so it's just a new verb. Like I said, it follows the same pattern as boire mostly, although instead of developing a Y in the nous and vous form, V shows up, right? The buvons, buvez, boivent. So that's a little strange. But other than that, it's pretty similar. So you can do one of two things now. You can either pause this video and go work on the practice. It's just practicing conjugating boire. It's nothing super complicated. Or you can keep watching and then do the boire practice when you do the practice for the next part of this video. This part's so short I didn't want to make it its own video, so I'm combining it with our next section. But that's it. Boire, to drink. Done. Now, let's talk about stem changing verbs. I know this is something you talked about in French 1. This is something you learned, that sometimes there are verbs whose stem changes when you conjugate it for certain pronouns. And you may remember a drawing of a boot around the pronouns it changes for. I think the easiest way is to just show you. So there are a few different patterns for stem changing the verbs, and the first one I want to look at is E, which will turn into E with an accent grave in the boot we're going to look at. So for example, one of these verbs is acheter. This is one you know from French 1. This is, I believe, the verb you talked about for stem changing verbs with. So acheter means to buy, and it is conjugated like this. J'achète, tu achètes, il, elle achète, nous achetons, vous achetez, il, elle achète. Okay, so you can see for 4 of these, really it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pronouns. Je, tu, il, elle. This E in the stem, because remember the stem, you would drop the ER, so achète here is the stem. This E gets an accent grave over it. Just in this little boot, right, in this section. In stem changing verbs, that is the section that will always change. So nous and vous will stay just like what you'd think they would, but stem changing verbs change in this specific boot. Je, tu, il, elle. And another verb that is conjugated like acheter, where this E in the stem will turn into an E accent grave in the boot, is amener. Amener, which means to bring. It means to bring a person, not like to bring a casserole. To bring a person, like to party. Amener, to bring. Okay, but there are other patterns for stem changing verbs as well, not just I to I grave. So let's look at another one. So some verbs, they can change from I acute to I accent grave. Let's look at one of these right now. This one you also know from French 1, and it's préférer. Préférer means to prefer. It's conjugated like this. Je préfère, tu préfères, il, elle préfère, nous préférons, vous préférez, il, elle préfère. Okay, so we can see, so our stem is the préfère part, drop the ER, and in our boot, right here, that second E changes to an accent grave. Préfère, préfère, préfère. Okay, but in the nous and vous forms, it stays the same. Préférons, préférons, préférez. So if you have a word that has two accents, like préféré, and you know it's stem changing, it's always going to be the second E that changes. So other verb that's conjugated like préférer, where the I accent aigu changes to an I accent grave, is espérer. Espérer. Espérer means to hope. To hope. Right? There's that boot again. Only changes in that little boot. Okay, and there's one more pattern for stem changing verbs we're going to look at, and it is why changing to I. You've seen this as well. I mentioned it earlier with boire. Boire isn't a stem changing verb, but it is an example of I's and Y's getting mixed up. It's backwards. Their I changes to Y. An example of a verb that is actually a stem changing verb where Y changes to I is payer. Payer, which means to pay. I think you also know the conjugation for this, so you're also familiar with this stem changing pattern. So it's conjugated like this. Je paye, tu payes, il, elle paye, nous payons, vous payez, il, elle paye. So you can see here that in the je, tu, il, elle forms, what we would normally think would be a Y, because that's a Y in the stem, changes to an I. Stem changing. Okay, payer. Verbs that are conjugated like payer, envoyer. Envoyer means to send. And nettoyer. Nettoyer, which means to clean. Okay, so you know these patterns. You've seen all of these patterns before. Right now, I'm just sort of like formalizing them, right? I'm formally telling you these are stem changing verbs. They follow these specific patterns, but you already knew how to conjugate them. You've seen these patterns before. It's nothing super out of control or new. Alright, so that is it for this video. You can go now and either finish your practice if you paused halfway through, or you can go start your practice. It's going to start off having you conjugate boire, and then move on to conjugating different stem changing verbs. That's it. If you have any questions, let me know. Happy to help, and au revoir.